All right, so today we're going to be looking at some research from OpenAI.
Okay.
And it's about training large language models to be able to do competitive programming challenges.
Right.
And so it's not just, teaching them to code, but like teaching them to actually reason
Yep.
like a human programmer.
Yeah, this is really interesting work. They highlight 3 AI systems in the paper, OpenAI's O1 and then O1 IOI.
Okay.
And this one was designed specifically for the International Olympiad in Informatics,
Oh, wow.
or IOI for short. And then they also have this more advanced O3 system. And what's really fascinating here is that O3 actually achieved a gold medal at the 2024 IOI. And it did so without relying on any of these like pre-programmed strategies or handcrafted solutions.
That's really impressive. That's like a huge accomplishment for even a seasoned human competitor to win a gold medal at the IOI.
Yeah.
So how does this like chain of thought reasoning actually work?
Yeah, so chain of thought reasoning is this technique where the model is going to generate a series of intermediate steps that lead to the final solution. And so it's almost like thinking out loud as a human to break down the problem into smaller pieces.
So it's not just spitting out code, it's like actually thinking through the steps.
Exactly.
Right.
And so this is where reinforcement learning comes into play,
Okay.
because the model learns from its mistakes. And it refines these chains of thought through trial and error, just like a human would during practice.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, a human, when they're practicing, they try something. If it doesn't work, they're like, okay, how do I need to modify my approach?
Right.
And it sounds like the AI model is doing the same thing.
Exactly.
So the research mentions using CodeForces, which is a pretty popular platform for competitive programming. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how they use that to test these models?
Yeah, so CodeForces is known for its rigorous coding competitions and global rankings.
Okay.
And so what OpenAI did was they recreated this testing environment to mirror these competitions with time limits, memory constraints, and all of the challenges that a human competitor would face.
So it's like a real like high pressure situation.
Yeah.
Wow. So they really put these models through the ringer.
Yeah, exactly. And the results were really striking. So the reasoning-based large language models like O1 and O1 Preview
Okay.
significantly outperformed a non-reasoning model, GPT-4o.
Okay.
And so this really highlights the power and importance of this chain of thought approach for these complex problems.
So is it safe to say that like, a model that can reason through these problems is going to do better than a model that's just like trying to, spit out code without really understanding what it's doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about O1 IOI. This is the model that was specifically developed for the International Olympiad in Informatics.
Right.
What sets this apart from the other models?
Yeah, so OpenAI took O1 and further trained it for the IOI specifically.
Okay.
And so this involved additional reinforcement learning that was focused on coding tasks.
Okay.
And then they also implemented these test time inference strategies,
Okay.
which basically means that the model is going to generate a large number of candidate solutions.
Okay.
And then they use these strategies to select the best one for submission.
So it's like almost like a filter?
Yeah, you can think about it that way.
Okay.
So for the IOI, they used clustering and re-ranking approaches
Okay.
to analyze how well these candidate solutions performed.
Okay.
And they did this on model-generated test cases and public test cases.
Wow.
And then they even added in this learned scoring function to guide the selection process.
It sounds like they're like, really giving it all the tools that it needs to succeed.
Yeah, it's almost like having a coach
Yeah.
help the AI compete at the highest level.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. And so how did O1 IOI actually perform in the competition?
So even with the standard IOI submission limit of 50 solutions, O1IO was able to achieve a ranking in the 49th percentile. And then when they relaxed this limit and allowed it to submit a much larger pool of solutions, it actually reached a score that would have earned it a gold medal.
Wow.
So very impressive.
So even within the constraints of the competition, it can still, it still shows a remarkable ability to solve these problems.
Exactly.
So let's talk about O3 now.
Right.
This is like the most advanced model.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that it doesn't rely on any of those human-engineered test time strategies that O1 IOI was using.
Yeah, so it developed its own strategies for evaluating and selecting its solutions.
Wow. So it's like learning how to learn.
Exactly. And so the performance improvement was massive.
Yeah.
On CodeForces, O3 achieved a rating in the 99.8th percentile.
Wow.
So this is a huge jump from O1 IOI.
Yeah.
And it suggests that these really sophisticated reasoning capabilities can emerge naturally through this extensive reinforcement learning process.
So it's like it's getting to a point where it can think for itself and be like, okay, this is the best approach for this problem. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the papers is that they talked about how O3 would sometimes write these simple brute force solutions alongside its more complex ones.
Right.
Was it using those to double check its work?
Yeah, it seems that way. It's like it was aware of its own problem-solving process, and
Yeah.
it wanted to make sure that its solution was correct.
Wow. So they didn't even program it to do that. It just learned to do that on its own.
Right. That's what's so fascinating about this. It really speaks to the depth of understanding that O3 developed.
Yeah, it sounds like it's almost like, it's getting to a level of understanding that we haven't really seen before in AI.
Exactly.
So I understand that O3 was also evaluated on the 2024 IOI tasks. Did they use the same approach that they did with O1 IOI?
Not exactly. They used a different sampling approach with O3.
Okay.
So they generated 1,000 solutions per problem rather than per subtask.
Okay.
And then they used a simpler selection strategy compared to O1IO.
Okay.
But even with this more streamlined approach, O3 still excelled. It exceeded the gold medal threshold even with that standard 50 submission limit.
Wow.
So no hand-holding or complex selection strategies needed.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
It seems like this research goes beyond just competitive programming.
Yeah.
The paper also mentions the HackerRank Astra dataset and SW Bench verified.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, so OpenAI wanted to see how well these reasoning models would perform on real-world software development challenges.
Okay.
So moving beyond just the theoretical realm of competition.
Okay, so how do they actually perform on those more practical tasks?
The results were really encouraging.
Okay, cool. Let's talk more about that after a quick break. We'll be back in a moment to explore the implications of this research for the future of coding.
So both HackerRank Astra and SW Bench verified, they focus on tasks that reflect the challenges that software engineers would face in real-world settings. And what we saw was that those reasoning capabilities that were developed through competitive programming, they actually transferred really well to these practical scenarios.
Okay.
So it's not just about, solving those theoretical puzzles.
Yeah.
These models, they're showing potential for tackling real-world coding problems.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
Are we talking about AI assisting with code generation or debugging or even project planning?
Exactly. You can imagine a scenario where you could describe the functionality you want to implement in a program.
Right.
And the AI could generate the code for you.
Oh.
And then this would free you up to focus on those higher level design and architecture decisions.
That sounds like it would make developers a lot more efficient.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's still some, pretty big challenges to overcome before we get to that point.
Right.
What are some of the hurdles that researchers are facing in this area?
Yeah. So one of the key challenges is ensuring that the code that's generated is reliable and robust. Right now, these models can sometimes produce code that's syntactically correct.
Okay.
But it might not fully meet the intended functionality, or it might have subtle bugs that are really difficult to detect.
Yeah, you definitely don't want AI generating buggy code.
Right.
Especially if it's going to be used in production systems or something like that.
Exactly. Another challenge is just the ability to handle these really complex real-world software development processes.
Okay.
So competitive programming is a relatively constrained environment.
Right.
But in the real world, software development involves collaborating with teams,
Right.
working with these huge existing code bases,
Yeah.
navigating all these intricacies of software design principles.
So it's not just like writing a piece of code that works by itself.
Yeah.
It has to fit into this larger ecosystem.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the ongoing challenge of refining the AI's reasoning abilities.
Okay.
We're still in the early stages of figuring out how to train these models to really understand and reason about code the way that humans do.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a complex task.
Yeah.
To think like a human.
Exactly.
So this research has sparked a lot of discussion about the future of coding and the role of AI. Some people think that, AI is going to completely automate software development.
Right.
And then others see it as more of a collaboration between humans and machines.
Right.
What's your perspective on how the role of human programmers might evolve in this, kind of new landscape?
I think that AI is going to augment human programmers rather than replace them.
Good.
So AI can handle a lot of these repetitive tasks,
Yeah.
like identifying potential bugs, suggesting code optimizations.
Right.
And this would free up human developers to focus on the more creative aspects of software development,
Okay.
like the design thinking, the problem solving, the innovation that requires human ingenuity.
Yeah. So it's not taking away jobs. It's just changing the nature of the jobs.
Exactly. It's about using AI as a powerful tool
Okay.
to enhance human capabilities.
Yeah.
Not as a replacement.
Okay. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then, what kind of skills and knowledge are future programmers going to need? How do you see the educational landscape changing?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think we're going to see a shift in emphasis from just rote memorization of syntax and algorithms
Okay.
to a deeper understanding of problem-solving methodologies, design principles, and the ethical considerations of AI-powered software development.
Yeah, because, if you're going to be working alongside AI, you need to be able to understand what it's doing.
Exactly.
And how to use it effectively.
Right. It's about moving beyond just the mechanics of coding
Okay.
to a more holistic understanding of the entire software development process.
This research has really gotten people talking about the future of coding.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are excited about the possibilities, but there are also concerns about things like job displacement and ethical implications.
Right.
What are your thoughts on these broader societal impacts?
Yeah, it's natural to have those discussions. And I think, as with any transformative technology, there are both benefits and risks to consider.
Right.
It's important to remember that AI is a tool.
Okay.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Right.
And so it's our responsibility to guide its development
Okay.
and to ensure that it's used in a way that benefits humanity.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about how we choose to use it.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's a great segue into a topic I wanted to discuss.
Right.
Which is, the ethical considerations surrounding the use of AI in coding.
Right.
This is a pretty multifaceted issue, and I think it deserves, careful attention.
Absolutely. There are a lot of ethical concerns that come up as AI becomes more integrated into the coding process.
Okay, let's dive into those ethical considerations in more detail. We'll be right back after a short break to explore that. Okay, so we're back, and we were just talking about all the ethical considerations that come with using AI in coding.
Right.
And it seems like there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest concerns, I think, is the potential for bias in the code that's generated. Because these models, they're trained on these massive data sets of existing code.
Right.
And if that code reflects, existing biases, whether that's, gender or racial or socioeconomic biases, those can get baked into the AI's decision making.
So we could end up with AI that perpetuates those biases or even amplifies them.
Exactly.
And that could have some, really negative consequences down the line.
Right. And it's not just about the data itself. It's also about the people who are developing these models.
Okay.
If the teams that are building these AI tools lack diversity, then their own blind spots and biases can easily find their way into the technology.
So it's really important to have diverse perspectives involved in every stage of the development process.
Absolutely. From data collection to model training to testing to deployment.
Yeah, makes sense. Another concern that I've heard about is the issue of transparency. These AI models can be incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really hard to understand how they arrive at their decisions.
Right.
So how can we trust the AI if we don't know how it's working?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's that black box problem.
Right.
You can see the input and the output,
Yeah.
but those internal workings of the AI are a mystery.
Yeah. And that makes it really hard to, identify any problems or correct them.
Right. And it also raises this question of responsibility.
Yeah.
If an AI system generates code that causes some kind of harm, who's accountable for that?
Yeah. Is it the developer? Is it the company that deployed it?
Right. Or the user? It gets complicated.
Yeah. And then there's also the issue of intellectual property.
Yeah.
Who owns the code that the AI generates?
Right. Is it the developer of the AI model? Is it the company that owns the AI?
Yeah.
Or is it the person who used the AI to create that code?
It's a lot of legal gray areas that we need to figure out.
Exactly. And as this AI-generated code becomes more common, we're going to need some clear guidelines and legal frameworks.
Right. So it seems like there's a lot of work to be done, both technically and ethically, to ensure that AI is used responsibly for coding.
Definitely.
What are some of the steps that we can take to mitigate these risks and make sure that we're using this technology for good?
So one important step is to address the issue of bias head on.
Okay.
So we need to make sure that those data sets are diverse and representative.
Right.
And we need to collect data from a wide range of sources.
Right.
And we need to be really carefully auditing these data sets for potential bias.
So it's about, making sure that the AI is trained on a more complete picture of the world.
Exactly. And we also need to prioritize transparency in AI development.
Okay.
So developers need to be able to understand how their tools are working.
All right.
They need to have access to the data and the algorithm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This will help build trust in the technology,
Right.
and it'll make it easier to identify and correct any issues.
So it's about making sure that we're not just blindly trusting these black boxes.
Exactly. And then, of course, we need those legal frameworks around intellectual property
Right.
to provide some certainty for developers, companies, users. And this will really help foster innovation in this area.
Okay, but I think, beyond all of that, it's really about fostering this culture of responsible AI development.
Absolutely.
We need to be educating developers about the ethical implications
Mm-hmm.
and encourage them to think critically about the tools they're building.
Right. It's about embedding those ethical considerations into every stage of the process.
Yeah.
From conception to deployment.
Yeah.
We need to move beyond this purely technical mindset
Okay.
and embrace a more holistic view that takes into account the societal impact.
I like that. So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about the people who are creating it and using it.
Right. AI is a reflection of us.
Yeah.
Our values, our aspirations for the future.
Right. And we need to make sure that it's a reflection that we can be proud of.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really thought-provoking conversation. And I think, our listeners have probably learned a lot about this really complex and rapidly evolving field.
I hope so.
So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into AI and the future of coding.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.